resting state, I'm going to talk about the Human Connectome Project. So the goal of the Human Connectome Project is to build a complete network map of the brain's connectivity. And how they did this is they made a giant database of about 1,200 subjects, and they had them do numerous types of scans, being fMRI, DTI, and different tasks and resting states, okay? And then they also had them do a bunch of behavioral tests so that you can download based off of certain behaviors or emotions and things like that. And so what we ended up doing is downloading based off of fear. And we did this because fear is best characterized by symptoms of anxiety. And we know a lot about those discrete regions that are involved in anxiety because of those fMRI task-based scans that have already been done. So those are those still ballet dancers, the dancers that are involved, we already know. Those are those discrete regions that are involved in anxiety. And because fear represents anxiety very well, that's why we did that. And so the subjects all took a fear somatic survey, and that means they took a survey about their physical fear symptoms. And so those tend to be these kinds of things like nausea, racing heart, things like that. So they took this behavioral survey, and it's all in the Human Connectome Project, and then we downloaded the top 40 and then the lowest 40 from that group of subjects. And we decided to analyze based off of that because it would be as a good psychiatric base case for why there would be differences in the timings between regions in that temporal dynamics. The idea is that there would be a difference there. And that is the background of why we're doing the whole study of temporal dynamics, as it hasn't really been studied before. Does anyone have questions about the background? Okay, cool. So now we're going into what I actually did this summer after having this whole idea in the background and being given the tools and everything by Hercules and David. So this is how we're going to see those timings and those differences, and there's going to be a lot of complicated ideas here, so feel free to ask questions when they come up if you don't understand. The first big concept here is the idea of an ROI. So this is a region of interest in the brain, and we identified 85 of them that we're gonna study because they seem like they are already involved with the idea of emotions, resting state, fear, that kind of thing. And these ROIs, again, are those discrete regions. They're those ballet dancers in that still image. We've identified them, we know that they are going to be active, and now we're just going to try to get the timing between them and see if there's anything there. So once we've identified those 85 ROIs, we have to process the data from the Human Connectome Project. What we did here is we downloaded the data, and then we made maps of all the ROIs. And then on each of the subject scans, we put all 85 maps on the scans, and then we extracted the signal information that's happening. So I'm kind of going to illustrate what the computer is doing there with my hands, okay? So this is kind of just like a mock-up of the brain and what's going on in the signal information. So I'm gonna make like a circle with my hands, and the idea is that that's gonna be the ROI map. Say this is just like ROI number 7 or something, and this is what the map looks like. We're just gonna place that somewhere on the brain, like right there. That's our map. And when it's red, the signal is high. When it comes down and turns yellow, it's decreasing. It's green, it's lower. When it turns blue, it's in its dip. And the idea is that you can extract all of that by looking at just like your map, and you can do it for all 85 of them, of the ROIs at the same time, but then you have to do it on all the subjects that you download too. So then what we do is we average all the ROIs from all the subjects, and you end up with 85 of these kind of like wave-like measures. And you have that for the high fear patients and the low fear patients for 85. And then you can compare two of those series. if you see two series that seem like they have the same frequencies, aka they have like the same peaks and troughs at like around the same time, and they seem like the amplitude is the same, the height is the same of those peaks and everything, then we kind of overlay them. If they line up, the idea is that they're completely in phase. Those ROIs are activating at the exact same time. So they get a signal and they both activate together, like this. And that's how they're going for about all signal processing at resting state. But if one of them has their first cycle slightly before the other, the idea is that there's a phase shift there. So this timing difference is that phase shift. And the idea there is that they're activating more like this, that one is coming slightly after the other. And the way we have been interpreting that is that it's the movement of the signal between the ROIs. So now this is kind of that temporal dynamics in the ballet dancers, right? So if the first ballet dancer is here, it's the amount of time taking for the ballet dancer to get here to the second ballet dancer. And that's that idea of temporal dynamics, and kind of like an easy overview of how to look at it. Does that make sense for the most part? Okay, cool. So the big idea of phase shift. And this is another really, really big concept here. And like I said, the idea is that it's just showing the time it's taking to get from one brain region to the next. It's that time difference between when their cycles start. Now, the way we extract that, because we're obviously not going to lay every single signal over each other and look at all 85 on top of all other 85. We do a statistical analysis called a cross correlation of them, and this just runs through a code. And what it brings out is these kind of graphs, right? And so this first one is the ROI, the reticular formation, and the ROI, the PAG, which stands for the para-aqueductal gray, but we'll just call it the PAG. And it does this cross correlation, and on this bottom axis, it's showing the lag time between them. And where the peak is where the lag actually occurs. So red here is high fear and blue is low fear. So if you just want to look at one of the colors, that's completely fine. So you see here that their peak is about at 0 between the reticular formation and the PAG, which is showing that there's about zero lag. So there's basically no phase shift, and they're in phase. If you look over here between the reticular formation and the lateral amygdala, you see that their peak is not above 0, it's slightly shifted to the left, maybe around like -7 or something like that. And the idea is that you have like a -7 phase shift. The negative part just talks about the directionality. So instead of it going from the reticular formation to the lateral amygdala, it's going from the lateral amygdala to the reticular formation. And this is just the statistical side of it. So what we did here is we did all the cross correlation stuff. You get these graphs, and then it's really easy just to find where that peak is and extract it as a number.
What are your units on those axes? So for the phase shift, is that out of 300, is that time, or is that like out of
the lag?
360 degrees in the cycle?
Yes. So lag this is not time yet. So I think this is extracted as I'm not actually sure. It might be. I'm not sure. I am not sure. I will look for you because I have the code, but we convert it really, really quickly into seconds after this, so that doesn't entirely matter to me in this situation. So then when it's converted to seconds, we end up here with this kind of matrix view of how the phase shift is. So I'll lay this out for you. We just took 3 of the 85 ROIs and we compared them and took those numbers. So obviously when you do the reticular formation with the reticular formation, you're not going to get any phase shift because it's the same ROI. So you kind of get this axis of x's in which there's no. And then you compare the same thing twice in this situation. So if you look at the PAG, the reticular formation, you get that comparison here and here, but with the opposite sign because that sign is showing directionality. So you can also kind of just ignore this top right corner as it's showing the same thing with the opposite sign. Now if we look at the PAG in the reticular formation, their phase shift is actually about 0.2 seconds. Positive, meaning that it's going from the PAG to the reticular formation, and that's why it's color-coded blue. If you look at the left hypothalamus and the PAG, you see that it's about negative 0.2 phase shift in seconds, which means the directionality is going the other way. So it's going from the PAG to the left hypothalamus in this situation. And this is a high fear. And then we can compare that to low fear. And what you see is that now, while there's still a phase shift, it's significantly different from the PAG to the reticular formation. It's now about 0.001 seconds for that movement, and now there's no phase shift at all between the left hypothalamus and the PAG. And these are kind of just the differences we're looking for. We're not sure what they mean yet. The idea is just that they're there, and that there's differences in those timings between when you're going from one ROI to the other. And this is just 3 of the ROIs. So when we do all 85 ROIs, you get something like this. And obviously this is very overwhelming. It's a lot of data, and which is why we make the smaller 3x3s. We can look at things a lot closely. But when you look at the big matrix, you can kind of see bigger areas that are having a lot of differences. So I think right here shows a good difference. You can see if I switch between the high and the low, you get a large coloration difference there. And you can kind of just switch between them and look and see where big areas are, because they represent, the way we laid that, they represent certain areas of the brain. So right here is the cortex, around here is the amygdala, and down here is like the brainstem. So you can kind of see where those differences are mainly, and then you can bring it down, make those smaller matrices, and look at the timings exactly. Okay, so this brings us to the temporally dynamic paths. So we already know what structures are involved in networks based off of previous research done, right? And those still images of the fMRI and those discrete regions we know are involved. When we add timing to those paths that we already know and directionality, that's when it becomes a temporally dynamic path. And this becomes important because now you can find more paths and more disruption in those pathways, rather than just like, this is active, now it's not active in this brain, you know? But now you can see if they're both active, but like the timing is really differently, then there's a different kind of disruption to that pathway, right? So this becomes this idea. So Hercules made this whole idea. And this is from previous research of things that are connected in the network in terms of like fear and anger. And we can confirm like these directionalities through these matrices, and we can add timings to them to become temporally dynamic paths. If you look over here, we don't have that PAG to reticular formation pathway yet, but if we look back at our matrix, we see that like we find that directionality from the PAG to the reticular formation, and we have that timing. So it allows us to add on to this with an arrow, and we can even add timings to it. So this is kind of just like a very base case of a way to use temporal dynamics in real-time analysis of ROIs and regions involved in high fear, low fear, and how those things could change. So that was the whole process of what I did this summer, basically. It's just looking at those things, understanding what they were doing and why they're important. Does anybody have questions about all of that?
So you don't know if it's a direct connection, because you could have something upstream that's activating both the PAG and the reticular formation. So when you draw that arrow, you don't really know that.
Mm-hmm. But the idea is that that's the way the movement is going.
And I have a question about the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
When you're doing these comparisons with the high fear and the low fear group,
Mm-hmm.
Are we looking at this resting activity, or was this when they were asked to like visualize? So it's
This
just
is all resting
in my
state
week I
data.
had a really fearful, stressful week, and you
Mhm.
scanned the brain, and you had a relaxing week because you weren't getting ready for this talk. Got it.
Gotcha. Yes, all resting state data. Any other questions? So looking at the future of temporal dynamics, I'm just going to give you two innovation ideas that have come up in research and readings. But the idea is that this is something that's never been studied really. And there's a lot there in temporal dynamics. We just looked at 85 regions, and there are already so many more regions you can look at. And I only showed you 3 comparisons, and there are so many comparisons, so many ideas of pathways you can look at, and other statistical correlations you can look at, just looking at that timing of those temporal dynamics. But I'm just going to talk about 2 innovations that I've read about in readings. So the first is this idea of artificial intelligence here. So current theories of brain disorders don't have those temporal relations. They're just like, this region is very active in schizophrenic patients, while it's not so active in non-schizophrenic patients. And that idea of on and off. But we have this giant data set that's perfect for artificial intelligence training. And so you can train a program to go through all these scans, look at these timings and these temporal dynamics, and find correlations. And those correlations you can then use to advance theories, find new theories about brain disorders and things that can happen there. And possibly, the idea with that is that you could even use it real time when doing a scan. You do a scan, you say, use the artificial intelligence program, and you can look for predispositions to things like schizophrenia, or just like very angry people, things like that, you know, like you can get those ideas from that AI training. Another innovation that I found was this idea of deep brain stimulation. So we know about like electrical stimulation treatments of certain brain disorders. And one thing that isn't true about those is they're not exactly specialized to like the neurocircuitry and the timing of patients and disorders and that kind of things. But if we know about temporal dynamics and we know specifically about certain disorders and the people involved, it's a lot easier if you go and you are saying, I'm going to stimulate this exact neuropathway in this person, and I'm going to make it less efficient or more efficient, because in people who are really anxious, they're having a really, really efficient pathway to the idea of like fear, extinction, that kind of idea. And you can use very specific neurocircuitry and timings of pathways to target those, make them less efficient, more efficient, that kind of idea. So that's just obviously a really big idea of how you could use temporal dynamics. And that is all I have for you. Any questions about the big idea, whole presentation, anything at all, let me know.